all of you wonderful people, and you, yes you know who you are. I'm covering Paladins 2 days in a row. Wait, what? Well, specifically I want to talk about the damage category, because the damage category right now has been hit hard. For a long time on PC, Leon and Cassie have been meta. And they have been nerfing Leon and Cassie pretty much every patch cycle to try and balance them out. But the problem is, the last patch that they did realistically kind of killed Leon to being a high tier pick. There's no real reason to pick her right now. So, with this in mind, I wanted to cover a little bit of a video of if I could make, like, one change to each of the damage characters. I shouldn't say one change, because it's like, if I could rebalance each of the damage characters, how would I go about doing it? So first, to understand, this is a game that, because of crossplay, they refuse to balance console and PC separately. So, to begin, you have Tyra is far superior on console, as is Victor, Vivian, and Kanessa. Those are your stronger champions on console. Those are probably the 4 strongest. Like, they can be strong on PC, but I'm specifically saying they're your strongest on console. And I'm saying Kanessa because she has an escape ability that can be hard for some people to track on console, compared to PC, where it's not really that hard to see where she's going and quick flip aim, especially if you're a character like Androxus or Eevee, who can flick aim very easily. For PC, Drogos, Cassie, all of your blasters, BK, Dredge, Willow, although Dredge is better on console, they perform better. Shaolin as well, but he's not played. So, one thing I want to look at, like, right now, so we're going to start with the champion that got hit the hardest, that's Leon. How do I rebalance Leon? Well, you have to look at what Leon's problem is. Leon's big problem is in presence, and how easy it is to reset with Eminence, because Eminence takes off 4 seconds of the cooldown, so it drops it down to an 11-second cooldown, and it deals more than 800 damage. And there are so many loadout cards you can run to coax it out. For example, this is my Eminence build right here, making it very easy to coax it out, especially off of a reset. Leon, because she has an elim reset on cooldown of 50%, she is what we like to call a snowball fighter. Willow will be in the same category, BK to a lesser extent, but BK is still in there, Tyra, Leon. These are characters that have a elimination giving them, or a kill, but mostly an elimination, because I think BK is a kill. Giving them massive cooldown reduction to basically allow them to snowball fights, going from, you know, you start off with presence first, and then you use Valor and Grace to finish, because that lets you have your longest cooldown start ticking down, and it gets the cooldown reduction on top of that. The reason why I say she got killed is because they nerfed her Enlightenment. So, her ult used to give her 100% damage and CC immunity, and now it just gives her 50% damage immunity. The problem with that is the damage that this ult deals. It has a full 1 second windup before you can even get the blast off. The problem is that this ability realistically is hard to coax out. You can't use this now to counter ults like you used to. Like, this would be a great ult for countering other damage champions in the game with high damage abilities, like countering a Victor ult, like countering a BK ult, like countering a Drogos ult, like countering a Dredge ult. You know, these were all abilities that Leon could counter that now she can't, because she's no longer damage immune, she's just damage resistant.
Leon.
First off, that change has to go away. If they want to remove the killing an enemy refunds 50% ult charge in exchange, I would have a problem with that. If they want to scale down the damage to maybe 1200, I don't have a problem with that. But the problem with nerfing her ult like that, it has killed her viability to use her ult as anything but just another damage ability that you maybe get a kill with. She can't use it to anti-flank anymore. Like, if a Talus jumps her, she cannot use this ability because one overcharge later, she's dead during that 1 second windup. So the big issue with her is presence. there's a very small and easy to use fix. So first off, for the talent Eminence, I would remove the cooldown reduction to 4 seconds. I would just flat out axe that. So Eminence now just increases the damage of presence by 50%, which would make the rest of her cards a bit more tempting because it's not too significant benefit. She's not getting massive cooldown reduction and a damage amp on this based off of range. The other thing I would do would be to rework presence so that it now deals 600 damage instead of 800, which would put her abilities a bit closer together, so it's not like this, you know, a bunch of 400 hits and there's one big ability. And I would reduce the base cooldown by 3 seconds. I would drop it down to 12 seconds. So you don't have Eminence having this big cooldown reduction anymore. I would make that base kit, but I would also reduce the damage. So having 600 damage on presence, and then with Eminence granting an additional 50% of that, that means that 900 is the max that you're hitting with. And people say, well, that's too far, but you also have to forget how quickly she can get snowballs. She can get heraldry to coax out. So you have a 12-second cooldown. If you hit the cooldown, it's down to 7 seconds, and if you get an elim off of it, you know, you have to look, you're taking 6 seconds off, and then you have 5 seconds. You pretty much always have uptime on this ability. So having it be a 900 burst, oh, that's so weak compared to right now. Right now, it's a 1200 burst. Well, yeah, I mean, that's a nerf, but you have to give her the damage reduction back for her ult. She's pretty much unplayable. See, Cassie's a character that they have a hard time balancing. Cassie. Because Cassie is... she has a very good feel to her. They've talked about maybe adding a delay between blast shot and your primary fire, but that doesn't really work well. The other problem, too, is talent-wise, like, Impulse is the most commonly run because it's just always effective. And you pretty much use Exaction to counter flanks, basically. It's like you roll, you get it. But the problem with Exaction is that there are builds that can give you just tons of reset. Having reset potential with this and having the life rip out of it makes it just this insane combo right here. I actually don't run Somersault in this build, and people are like, well, why is that? Somersault's such a great card, but they did nerf Somersault. Not by a lot, I just don't run it on that build. I don't need that. I'd rather focus on, like, aiming and stuff like that. The other problem with Cassie that she has is she has a very good card in Blast Shower for coaxing out Blast Shot even more, with Impulse, mind you, which already has a cooldown reduction built on it. You know, I could see that being pretty effective. She has a decent amount of cards that are really helpful to help her reset and get her cooldowns back. And because her aiming requirement isn't the hardest in the world, it seems pretty effective. What I would realistically do would be to rebalance her in a way. So, for example, on Exaction, I would maybe put an internal cooldown, like a 5-second internal cooldown on between shots. So, that would prevent, you know, roll, shoot, and having this double spam of like 800 and 900 in 2 shots. Yes, you're having to burn the dodge roll to use it, but that's such an insane combo, especially with Blast Shot. Another thing for Impulse, I would like Impulse to maybe have the 2-second cooldown reduction removed. Again, that's a big thing for me. I don't think the cooldown reduction should be in the loadout card. I think it should be in the loadout card, not the legendary. So maybe take the 2 seconds off of Impulse and add an additional 150 damage to compensate. That could be a nice, or to make it so that the cooldown decrease only applies to a direct shot to an enemy. That would be another way that you could potentially change this, instead of it just being, hey, flat 2-second cooldown reduction plus a damage buff. Big Game is pretty much a tank killer. And it really does buff Disengage, because Disengage isn't very powerful. Like, when you're running Disengage, you're using it for 2 reasons. You're using it to knock back a tank, or knock somebody off the map, or you're running Big Game. And that's what you use it for. I would be interested to see Big Game reworked, because Big Game is very annoying for tanks to deal with. Because even though it's, you know, 4 seconds, that's still 4 shots, and it's additional health damage on top of that. An interesting thing to me for Big Game would be to targets hit by your Disengage, have their abilities silenced for 2 or 3 seconds instead of 4 seconds. Basically, hitting a target with a disengage would keep them from coming back on the map, potentially. I could see Big Game being a very strong anti-CC type thing. Using it to prevent, you know, a Mother's Grace Inara from earthing and guarding while in air to stay on the map, potentially. And I could see maybe Big Game being used against other people than just tanks. Buffing it up to being more useful than just a 2-tank counter, because you can't run Impulse against 2-tank. Big Game is better for that. The next character I would rework, and this is just for Shaolin. This is a talent change for me. I would like to see... Well, first off, I would like to see Impaler Era, which can be toggled on and off. I would like to see a 1-second cooldown between being able to re-toggle it if you toggle it on and off. I would like to see that as a balancing factor. I mean, it's not really needed, but I would add it because of the big change I would make. So Desert Shadow has been absolutely garbage since the fact that they removed the additional 2 seconds of stealth. I would completely remove Desert Shadow's damage buff. I would make it so that you are immune to reveal effects and CC to all CC and reveal effects when in withdrawal. I would basically make it an actual escape ability. It would guarantee stealth through Illuminate, Cassie ults, Strix flares, etc. It would cleanse it if you're already affected by it, and it gives you CC, so that you can't be, like, knocked off. You try and withdraw, and somebody like an Ashe just knocks back, knowing that they can get a kill there. That would be a solid way to buff him to being more than just a straight-up damage dealer, and maybe giving him some counterplay to other characters in the game. I think the problem is he's, like, outmatched by Cassie on PC, and on console there's no reason to use him because of how long it takes him to draw back shots. He doesn't really apply caught that well. So, Strixy boy, oh god. Strix. First off, both snipers need a nerf of about 100 damage to their base kit. For Strix, I would nerf his damage from 1200 to 1100, so he cannot one-shot characters. That's the first thing I want to put out. The other thing I would like to do is I would put a cooldown between his ability to switch between rifle and pistol. Period. I think you should have a cooldown on there. Now, you could make this a loadout card. So, for example, everyone used to run Dexterous. I would return Dexterous back to being 100%, but there would be a cooldown between how long you can switch. So, for example, it reduces your quick switch. You could make it an instantaneous switch to your pistol, but you have to stay in pistol for 3 seconds, as an example. You can't just immediately switch back to the rifle. Another change I could make for Strix, talent-wise, I think Crackshot and Nocturnal are fine. I would potentially make I would definitely rework unauthorized use. I would remove it where the flare does more damage and has the cooldown reduction. I would make it so it switches the flashbang and the flare. So now the flare becomes a permanent, like, 8-second reveal when he shoots it out as an ult, and flashbang would become his L2 in pistol, but it only affects one enemy and lasts 1.5 seconds. I basically would give you an interesting option to choose your ult, basically. I think that's kind of an interesting option, and it does fit with the name unauthorized use. I just think the flare is pretty solid for a pistol build. Other than that, there's not a lot you can really do to him. Maybe if you wanted to be a cunt, you could say he could not be in scope while in stealth. That scoping would take you out of stealth, but I think that kind of breaks the design of the character. Canessa really actually needs kind of a buff. I do think the sniper mode needs a bit of a nerf, but I would like to see maybe the damage per shot in Carbine go up. I would like to see maybe her Carbine dealing, you know, 200 damage per shot, or a rate of fire increase to 0.1. But her sniper shot should be nerfed down to 1100 as well. Put it on par with Strix. I would also like to see maybe the charge time for a fully charged shot being reduced down to 1.2 seconds as a quality of life. So Strix still has a faster scope in for damage. I know that's a balancing factor because of, like, Headhunter, but the problem with Eagle Eye and going for a Headhunter build is it's just ineffective. It lets you do a lot of damage, but it's not worth it. I mean, another thing as well is her mines are pretty much ineffective. Maybe increasing the health of the mines up to 250 would be nice, so it makes them more of a threat to burn down. But for Drogoz needs a pretty big rework, because on console, he's fucking impossible. You have to have a hit scan to deal with him, and the damage fall-off is insane because of Wormjets. Like, Wormjets has made it so that Drogoz stays in air and doesn't die. He can miss 50% of his shots and still kill you. I would prefer if they reworked Wormjets and Fuselage, so they kind of switch it. So, when you run Wormjets, you get that movement speed, wall, and booster, but it removes the AoE. So you have to hit direct shots. And for Fuselage, I would say that it would increase the projectile speed of his individual shots by 30 or 40% instead, making it so that he can actually confirm damage faster instead of having the damage bonus, because he already deals 850 a shot. There's not a lot that I would really do to change, like, base kit or anything like that. I mean, I'm glad they did the quality of life change to his booster base kit, but being able to stack Wormjets on top of that makes him unkillable. He's one of the first people I would talk about loadout cards for as well. Potentially having some better loadout cards, because most people are going to run their things around thrust and booster fuel. You'll have Masterful in a few of the builds. You're not going to see lung capacity, follow descent. You're not going to see Bask, Decimate, or Spitfire. You're only going to see Hyper Boost, Condensation, and Masterful. Those are the only 3 cards you really see. And then you're going to see these cards right here. And even then, you're not seeing Hot Swap used a lot. You know. And it's a shame, really, that there are just so many cards on him that go wasted. Potentially reworking these cards. Maybe you can take some of the booster cards out and turn them into that faster flight speed projectile. But I think having up to a 50% flight speed projectile is broken, and the 25% wouldn't be enough. I think that's a hard balance right there. For Willow, I think one of the biggest things with Willow is people on PC run Blast Flower. And it's so annoying to go up against good console players that use it, because what we do is you shoot a tank 2 or 3 times to get your Blast Flower stacks up, and then you turn around and 2-shot flanks and supports. Pretty much. And that's annoying. That is absolutely annoying to me. I would rework Blast Flower completely. So they made some changes to her base kit to increase the AoE. They like buffed her and nerfed her and buffed her and nerfed her. Basically, I would make it so that Blast Flower would instead increase the area of effect of your shots by a larger amount, making it easier to confirm damage rather than having the damage stack up. I think the other 2 talents are fine. I think her mobility is fine now that they buffed it. I think Seedling and Dead Zone are pretty balanced for what she does. Card-wise, most of her cards are unimpressive. Having the cooldown reduction leads to some Elim spam. It makes her a snowball killer. Card-wise, most of her cards are pretty bad, in my opinion. There's not really a lot of great cards that she has. She has some ammo regen, some health regen, some cooldown reduction, some DR, some movement speed, but none of them are really game-changing. Like, Just Believe at 5, you know, put Flora at 4 or 5, and the rest of what you put in doesn't matter. You know, that's the issue with her. She does need some more diverse cards than just that. For Dredge, oh boy. A cooldown on Broadside. That's the only thing I really want on him. A cooldown on Broadside, so you can't just be this overly spammy character, or maybe giving the damage back to Scuttle, putting it at 1,000, but adding an internal cooldown of 5 seconds. Imani's a hard one to balance. I would say potentially giving her a loadout card, because, like, Heatsink is bad, Cooling Ruins is bad. Both of those cards are completely outmatched by Draconic Will, so there's no reason to run those. Elemental Grace is bad. I mean, there's no reason to run that. And both Arcane Ice and Arcane Flame are bad. Like, you're not seeing these cards realistically run, except in meme builds. Potentially reworking Cooling Runes and Heatsink. Like, Heatsink being granting extra health to the dragon. I think that makes her dragon a bit more tanky, so it's not just like, it doesn't go out and immediately get destroyed. And maybe cooling runes being... I don't know. I think maybe they could add this to her... They could remove the slow from her ice bolts and add them to cooling runes. So each tier of cooling runes, enemies hit by ice bolts are slowed by 5% per tier. The big thing that I would say for Amani, both of her talents are good. What they did for Splitting Ice balances it out. What they did for Pyromania balances it out. Mana Rift is still weak, but it's a set style of play. There's not really a lot you can do to her. I would say maybe increase the damage and remove the slow. So remove the 15% slow, but buff the damage up to like 700 a shot or 750 a shot. I think that balances out. Making the dragon a little bit easier to control. Basically, like, quality of life changes. Other than that, that's really the reason why. BK.
Say my name.
I would love if they got rid of the fucking bullshit-ass royal subjects. And they made it so that bombs stick longer instead of increasing the radius. I'm tired of that newbie-ass card of royal subjects. So making it so that the bombs actually stay longer would be a better card for me. As well as Accelerant. A lot of people like to ignore Accelerant. Maybe if you, like, guarantee a stun, like what they did with Ensnare, I could see that being effective. Like, it guarantees they will be stunned for a second and a half, regardless of the amount of resilience that you have. Similar to how Ensnare works. Other than that, I think his abilities are pretty good. They're high risk, high reward. Card-wise, I realistically would like to see Reinforced Casing being reworked into a DR card, maybe. Making it so that kills grant 10, 20, 30, 40, 50% DR for 2 seconds instead of extra ammo, because you can't really benefit from the extra ammo as Bomb King, because you can't have more than 6 bombs out at a time. I think that card's a bit useless. Another thing I might like to see is potentially Air Blast, to where this is a solid card, but maybe increasing the air control by 15%. Solid buff if they want to buff him up. The big people that the big three that they want to talk about. We're going to talk about Tyra first, before I talk about the other two.
Tyra.
So for Tyra, they did nerf her Hunter's Mark, but that means that her Firebomb and Burn Monster are still the same. One thing I do to nerf Burn Monster, because it's always been strong, they've never really reworked it. I would make it so that she does not apply Cauterize off it. Because for those that do not know, targets that are in a Burn Monster have 50% Cauterize applied to them. Okay? I would remove that on Burn Monster. Because it deals percentage damage, so it deals 18% of their maximum health over 0.6 seconds instead of 9%. And it cripples them. It's killer. I would remove the healing reduction. I would make it so that you actually can stay in the fire with a strong enough healer instead of, oh shit, I have to run. Her cards are fairly strong. I think the issue that I have is that people like to make the wrong builds on it and say their build is better than this other person's build, which is completely wrong. She benefits so much from Primal Might just for the elims. All of her cards are fairly balanced, I would say, for what they do. I would perhaps like a movement speed card off of Grenade Launcher instead of damage reduction. If they want to keep Mercy Kill in the current state that it's in, which is getting 3 charges. I don't like Mercy Kill. I think it's pretty bad. People like running it because it's a good anti-flank. I would say if they want to balance Mercy Kill out and make it a little bit stronger, I would perhaps make it that killing an enemy with Grenade Launcher grants 25% ult charge. Because of the addition of ROM, they've clearly shown that they're not afraid of having an ult charge card in loadout, like in legendary card form. For the last 2 damages to talk about, Vivian. Vivian, really, there's not a lot you can do. There's 2 memes that I would like to see done. Because you can't really change her base kit that much. I would say Opportunity and Chaos makes it so that the reload time is longer if you run that card. So, firing continuously for 2 seconds, you gain 20% increased damage, but it increases your reload time by 20%. This means that Deft Hands becomes a necessity. Basically, I would like to make her damage more on par, or her reload more on par with ROM, to compensate for the bonus damage. The other thing I would do for Suspect Everyone is to perhaps change it to an adaptive shield. So instead of you and deployables taking less damage from enemies revealed by sensor drone, make it so that her shield now gains additional health based off of the amount of enemies that are near you. So, like, for example, your deflector shield gaining an additional 200 or 300 health per enemy within a 20-foot radius of you. Making it so that she can be a bit tankier. I see that as being an interesting thing. I don't see it being played a lot, but I see it being interesting. The last change is Victor. And Victor right now is in a very bad state. Because he's a must-pick character because of the fact that he's just so powerful. He has solid damage at any range. And the big problem that he has is that all three of his cards are good for the wrong reasons. So Shrapnel makes it so you can't miss a grenade. But it's the only non-bitch mode card. Burst mode turns you into a sniper, but it limits your ability to fight up close. So basically, you have to stay at the back. And if you get jumped by a flank, you have to throw a grenade and run away. And Cardio makes it so that you pick fights and run away, and there's no reward for it. All three of these cards realistically need to be reworked. I think that if you want to make him a bit more skill-based, talent-wise, yeah, he's supposed to be a beginner-friendly character, but he's just sheer... The amount of damage that he deals is insane. Okay, there's a thing called a skill cap. So a character like Victor, that's just aim, shoot, throw grenade, and run. If you are the #1 Victor in the world, you should not be outdoing a character that requires more skill than you. So the #1 Victor in the world should not be outdamaging the #1 Bomb King in the world, as an example. This should not be the case. And that is the case right now. It's that Victor deals more damage than Bomb King does. Even though Bomb King requires a higher skill cap, he's less effective. And that's realistically the problem. People have figured out that Victor does not have a high skill cap, and he deals more. For Cardio, I do understand why Cardio is in the game. I do understand it. I would make Cardio do one of two things. First off, it has to have an internal cooldown on it. It has to have a 5-second internal cooldown between the end of a sprint and your next sprint. So when you are running, you can't just run, shoot for a few seconds, run, shoot for a few... I've literally seen Victors that Cardio, throw grenade, Cardio for 8 seconds, throw grenade, Cardio for 8 seconds, throw grenade. They have to fix that. Another thing I could see happening is potentially reducing his movement speed from 65% to 50%. I would not like that. I don't think that would be a major deterrent. But, I don't know. Cardio just... Basically, he can run for 5 seconds and get his health back. And it also is a problem because people are like, well, you just need to buy Cauterize. But the problem is that a Cardio Victor on your team that is doing nothing but running to regen health is not putting out damage. For burst mode, I would increase the damage in scope. I would make it so that I would actually change burst mode to where, if I wanted to make it more effective and just, like, playable, I would make it so that burst mode only activates while in Iron Sight. So if you're in Iron Sight, you get the burst bonus. Other than that, it's standard hipfire AR if you're hip firing. That's the big change I would make to it, instead of the burst. That's just quality of life. For Shrapnel, I would remove the radius effect instead. I would make it a bit easier to aim, but I would make it so it adds an additional 200 damage over 3 seconds. An additional 200 damage over time for 3 seconds as a bleed out. Because when you think of Shrapnel, you think of, like, little bits of metal and bone that get stuck in you and cause you to bleed out. You don't really think of Shrapnel as being a much larger radius of effect. If you're throwing a fragmentation grenade, you know there's going to be a relatively large blast radius, and you have to watch out for the shrapnel. Well, the name of the card and what the perk does don't really fit. I would like to see shrapnel reworked into that, so it would give him an additional source of damage as a bleed out, so people who try and hide around a corner to avoid a grenade, because they're like, I'm not going to get hit by that grenade, I'm fine, they can still get killed off that. I think that makes it a bit easier. Another thing is maybe for shrapnel, I would like to see the loadout card Grenadier. I would like to see that added to shrapnel. In that maybe getting a kill with your grenade resets the cooldown. That could be an alternate idea. But anyway, that's my thoughts on reworking the damage category. Hope you enjoyed.